become symmetrical. But right now, things are on the move. And things will sometimes move for 60 days after cranial work, you know, and still moving around and shifting around. We had one lady in Tulsa, Oklahoma with a bean-shaped head. And I remember that when she thought negatively, the bean shape went over, you know, like this direction. And then when she thought positively, then it went this direction. But either way, it was bean-shaped. It took a couple of months for that to settle out. But just from one swing to the next, you know, depended upon her attitude toward things, and she had to learn to control her emotions and her feelings to wherein things stabilized. Now, I want to tell you one other little situation here. If I could have this on. There we go. Oh. Now, I had a nurse in Chicago who had a problem in her attitude. From the time that she was born, she was unhappy. And the word pattern was, I'm unhappy. I'm unhappy. And no matter where she did, no matter what happened, no matter who she was with, and no matter how much joy she could have had, her attitude was, I'm unhappy. We gave her a cranial, which we'll get into here directly. And during the cranial, her head went snap, and it sounded like you dropped a watermelon on the floor. It just went snap, kind of a thud snap. And she said, I'm happy. And she's been happy ever since. And she's very happy that she's very happy, you know. And the thing that happened is that one of the calcifications, which could be on any of these particular sutures, it could have been on this one up in here. We don't know which one it was, because her whole head just went crunch. Now, in the situation here, this was proof to me, and was one of the great learning experiences to me, is that some of us sometimes have a thought pattern which is locked directly into these organic computer chips full of stored memory, or what we will call these calcifications in and along the various sutures of the cranium. Doug said yesterday, he made the statement about the work of Sutherland, something to the effect is that the cranial position precedes the spinal. And the way that I understood it and have read it is that a cranial scoliosis will accompany and precede a spinal scoliosis. Now, oftentimes, if you correct the spinal scoliosis, which all of you have the tools to do now, oftentimes you will have a great deal of cranial movement because the two are interrelated and inseparable. Now, if you have tremendous amount of calcification in the spine, then the cranial scoliosis, even though you do cranial work and get the cranial symmetrical, it's not sufficient to move the spine because the spine will still be calcified in certain areas. And vice versa. You can do a lot of work on the spine and get the spine straight, but you'll still have calcifications along the sutures of the cranial, which will hold that in an asymmetrical condition. Asymmetrical meaning not symmetrical. Okay? Now here's what we have to look at very, very carefully, is that many of the thought patterns that we now have will be conspicuous for their absence as soon as we are able to dissolve the calcifications in the cranium. And some of our attitudes can be in any area, affecting any area of our life. And suddenly they'll come up, they'll be poofed, and we'll never have that thought pattern again, which would hold us in a state of resistance or hold us in a state of non-progression, if I can use that expression. Okay? And we can clear that out of there. And then we start moving toward a greater degree and a higher degree of intelligence. Now, hopefully, we can do this with a certain degree of integrity. Because integrity is something in this world which is missing to a great degree. Now, you have little pockets of some areas where there is degrees of integrity, where people tell the truth, where people are true to their heart, and they have respect for the human soul, and they treat other people with dignity and respect, and look upon them as children of the one God. But you have many areas of the world where people don't do that, and they steal from one another, they mistreat one another, they are inhumane to one another, and there are wars and more wars and more wars, and the children born and raised under those circumstances are raised without natural affection, with a desire also for destruction to other people. And this is becoming quite increased, and this is passed down genetically from one generation to the next, where people will then be genetically designed or programmed to become violent, vicious, without love, without intent of service, and so on. Now, hopefully, we who are involved in body electronics can make a big swing to the good, where just one person, in taking a position of pure integrity in dealing with himself, herself, and other people, that one person can make a big difference, because that'll influence morphogenetically the people that they're tied into on a genetic level. And then by helping other people to do the same thing, there can be an influence which will be profound earthwide. I intend to be one person to help to make that difference. I hope that your intention is to do likewise and not get bogged down in the pursuit of power, wealth, and pleasure, which most people are involved in. We have done that for generation upon generation upon generation. We have mastered the art of warfare and destruction to mankind. We have mastered the art of chasing after wealth and pleasure and power. History books will prove this over and over again. We have mastered that. Now, the next great frontier that we have to master is the mastering of the human mind, wherein, by the free choice of will, with intent and desire, we bring the human mind into a oneness with the laws of the universe, or what we might call the laws of God. This is the greatest challenge we have before us, is to master the human mind and bring this human mind into a oneness with universal laws. That doesn't mean we can't have fun while we do it. That doesn't mean that we can't have a sense of humor and we have to go around with a serious look on our face all the time. But that does mean that we become a constant source of joy and happiness wherever we go, so that every time we take a footstep, a flower grows. This is how I like to look at myself and look at other people, that wherever we go, we leave it in better condition than how we came to it. Now, I believe that is possible. And if we have enough people believing that is possible, out of the ruins of the future destructions of this planet, we'll have pockets of people that can spring forth a new people in a new time. And that is yet to come. And I believe that many of us will be there during that time to help make those changes, so that we have a springboard into a new future. with the residual numbers of people that will be left after the great scourge, which is yet to come. It's here now, and it's happening with greater intensity than ever before. Now, we know that. Now, with this in mind, I made the statement that the greatest mystery that we have to learn while in these tabernacles of clay, the greatest mystery we have is to learn how to control the human mind and bring it into a oneness with the one God, which activates our minds and gives strength to our heart. And that's as simple as I can put it. Now, this mystery is going to be absolutely exciting to you as we move into cranial work. Now, sometimes we start taking the little miracles of life as commonplace, and other things become a little more difficult for us. But we're going to deal now with 4 particular bone structures. I want you to take very careful notes. You'll find this particular number 25 on your handouts. Number 25 on your handouts. And let's start with some simple little mysteries. Brooke, did you ever find, where's Brooke? Is Brooke here? Okay. I wonder if he found his handouts. We don't know. Okay. We're going to first of all very carefully analyze the temporal bone. I still fully expect you to get your hands on a person's head and feel around this particular suture. Now, the suture goes around what we call the temporal bone. This is the temporal bone here, which will be broken down into 2 parts. Now, the temporal bone will have what they call the sphenoidal temporal suture, which will be the suture which exists between the sphenoid bone here, this is the sphenoid bone, and the temporal bone here. So you'll have one suture here which will be continuous then with what we now call the squamosal suture. And the squamosal suture will be on your checklist. And you can feel these on different people's heads. Now I think, Anarchy, I think you've got one here on the side of your head, don't you? And on the right-hand side, as you go up there, and the left side, you'll have, this suture will be off. Doug?
I think on the checklist, though, they'll actually refer to that as the spheno-squamosal suture.
The spheno-squamosal suture. You'll find that in different textbooks. The spheno-squamosal suture will be this one right here in some textbooks. You'll find that in other textbooks as the sphenoidal temporal suture, which will identify it because it exists between the 2 particular bones of the skull. Now, one thing about this particular suture, you have a number of little landmarks along the way. One will be here. We're not going to worry about that yet. One will be here. We're not going to worry about that yet. But what we are going to point out is that this particular part of the bone structure of the temporal bone, right in here, is called the squama. S-Q-U-A-M-A. The squama. And this portion here, which will include the ear down through here, will be called the mastoid process of the temporal bone. So the mastoid process of the temporal bone will be this portion. And this is where the ear, the orifice of the ear is right here. Okay, now this part is extremely important. And Doug, I'd like you to take the Yassel. I want to introduce you at this time to Yassel if you haven't met Yassel. This gentleman here was a remnant of the Vietnam War, and he introduced himself just as this one fellow was cutting his head off. His name is Yassel. Two of you got the joke. Okay, but this is Yassel. He did introduce himself as his head was being cut off. If you pronounce Yassel very carefully, you can understand where he got his name. Anyway, we have Yorick to go with him, you know. Yorick is another skull that Doug has over in Pennsylvania. And this is a little one here. Doug, what do you call that one? This is Fred, okay. Fred's a very nondescript thing for a fake skull. But that's a good one. But Yorick here, no, this is not Yorick, this is Yassel. He has a very interesting little temperament. And Doug, if Doug will pass this around, I want you to show the group here one totally unique aspect of Yassel, and that is going to be right down through here. You are going to have a suture which is unique. You'll find this on very few people's skulls. Now, I really haven't dissected that many people to find out what their skull looks like. But I do understand that this mastoid suture, Doug, if you'll just pass that around and just any way you want to, be very careful of the skull. He's been dropped a few times and it's getting a little bit weak and wobbly. Oh, he needs a lot of dental work. I've helped immeasurably to remove some of those little, some of the teeth that are left. But the suture goes right down through here. And you won't find that on too many skulls, I understand, but it's called the mastoid suture. Now, what does the mastoid suture mean? I don't have the foggiest idea. I used to have a lot of good ideas, and I'd be very quick to give people my opinions as to what I thought the mastoid process did. But since anything causes anything, I cannot say any longer as to what the mastoid process does. Because when we get into this mastoid bone and start dealing with it, it's very interesting. Now, you've got to be very, very careful. He loses the top of his head occasionally. Just hold the top of the head on as you go around. I've lost a few screws and a few little things that hold it together. Okay, as you're looking at this mastoid process, which is rather unique, I'd like you to think of a gear. You know what a gear is? You've got your gear, and the things mesh in together, and you've got this type of a motion. You know what a gear is? Okay. Now, do you know what a beveled gear is? A beveled gear is flat, where they mesh at an angle. And so you have one gear will be like this, and the other gear will be out here at an angle, so that your direction of how the gears are interrelated will be at an angle. Now, in this matter right here, all of these particular sutures will be beveled, so to speak, wherein instead of having the bone structures articulating in a up and down manner, one with the other, you will have them at an angle like so. So this will all be at an angle where this part of the temporal bone here actually kind of overlays at an angle the sphenoidal bone here and the parietal bone up here. The parietal bone is this particular bone structure here. So you have this beveling of the gearing mechanism which holds those together, and that beveling, that this sucks this particular temporal bone into a situation where it's very, very hard to move it in relationship to the parietal bone, because if you've had as a child a baseball or a bat or something of some game hit you on the side of the head in the temporal bone area, this will cause calcifications to occur along this area here, and that will stop the motion. That will lock in the bone structure so that they do not have that primary respiratory mechanism, and you've locked in that particular area so you block the free flow of cerebral spinal fluid. Are you with me on that? Okay, so our job then is to dissolve all the little calcifications along here. Now, I look at all that and I wonder how to do that most effectively. And so I began thinking, okay, if you are able to torque the entire temporal bone in such a way, and you torque it where you apply pressure somewhere on that, you can cause that temporal bone to rotate, and by the rotational factor of the temporal bone, through force being applied on a lever basis, it'll cause all of the crystals or calcifications along the sutures to dissolve. And that was reasonable. And so I thought to myself, okay, now how can I torque that thing? And so I began looking at the mastoid process here. Now, the mastoid process, if I press on the mastoid process, and I press kind of toward the eye, the orbit of the eye, and I press firmly on this bone structure, that's like a little lever. You follow me? And as I force this particular mastoid process in as a lever in this direction, right directly toward the eyeball, then this entire temporal bone is going to become rotated in a clockwise position. You've got that? You paying close attention on that? You've got that? Everyone in the back got that? Can you see what I'm doing? Okay, now this is really exciting because all of a sudden this particular bone structure begins to move, and every single memory that's been suppressed of blows to the head to come out, and you are in absolutely wonderful, blissful pain. Now, if you've got this genetically from your ancestors, then all of the pain of your ancestors that have locked this thing in that you've inherited, you inherit the energy pattern of your ancestors from the moment of conception. It's a hologram. The egg and the sperm are holograms of your mother and father, which bring all of your genetic memories with that egg and sperm, and there we are as a constitutional man. So we're dealing with our constitutional man here. And then the memories will come in such a way of all the things that have happened to us on a soul level that we brought with us from prior lifetimes. And that's overlaid on the constitutional man, so you're going to have all kinds of funny things happen. And I want to warn you a little bit. There are some of you will have memories that have no reality to a carbon-hydrogen body, because there are other bodies that we have had, robot-type bodies. We've had other type of bodies that are like a Disneyland type of body, you know. And you have all these things will start flashing to our memories where we've had injuries to other bodies other than the carbon-hydrogen bodies that we have now. And this goes clear back in time. Where's Carol J? Carol, now yesterday, I think it was yesterday, you were sitting and looking at a whole mass of movements of if I recall correctly, I was looking at your pictures here, and you're looking at a whole lot of cubes and tetrahedrons and spheres running around with different personalities and different communication devices. Is that correct? And you had just a flood of them, and this type of reality disappeared, and you had a new reality of all types of geometric forms. Some things look like beautiful diamonds and so on that you were getting through your memories. Is that correct? Okay. Now, please come up here for a minute, because I want this to be made a matter of record, because just the point holding on the tailbone, point holding on the spine, will be moving the cranial situation and bringing these things up to memory. Now, this used to be absolute heresy, but now it's such a common thing that we want to bring it to your attention so you're not spooked out by it when it happens to somebody on the table. Tell us how it is.
Okay. I started off in this life, and I went into emptiness in my heart in my childhood, and not knowing who my parents are. I don't know who you are. And I just went further and further into that, and then I was in space. I was in nothing, nowhere, nobody, nowhere. It went on through that for quite a long time. And then I saw a cube with a red and a blue and a white face. I think one of my facilitators asked me if that was me. I didn't want to know about that at that stage. And we went further, and I saw a white sphere. I really liked the white sphere. There was quite a draw to that white sphere. There were a lot of other shapes. There was a yellow pyramidal shape. That was my father. There was a green rectangular, orange, different geometrical shapes. There were some who had, I don't know the name of the geometrical form, but they had spiky points coming out on them. I didn't like them. They frightened me. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, yeah. And I was a baby. I was a baby cube. And I was scared. And that white sphere was my mum, and I was saying, in the end I thought, well, I'm just surrendering to this. It doesn't matter if I'm a cube. I can't relate to it from this body, but I'll just go into it. It's just the same as any other session. So the sphere kept telling me, just follow me, I'll look after you.
Oh, beautiful. Who was that?
My mother. But the cube, my father wouldn't speak to me. And in this lifetime, it was a bit like that with my father. He was too busy. I never got really close to him, and he didn't speak to me enough. And I've also manifested relationships in this lifetime where the man didn't speak to me enough. I brought that with me. So long, how long it is. So this went on for a considerable length of time, and I got frustrated and angry. I didn't want to be in a cube. I didn't want to be there, and wanted to get out of there, and there's no feeling. So the word pattern came up. I can't feel, there's no feeling. I want to feel it. I want love. I want other feelings. I want feelings. And that's a major word pattern which has come out in a session a couple of days ago. Pertaining to this body, after my second son was born, I didn't have feeling. I wanted feeling. And so I brought that with me from this cube existence. So then I worked with that, and I had to surrender to being in the cube. I realised I wasn't loving being a cube, and that was why I was stuck in the session for 2 hours being a cube. So then I realised I had to accept being with nothingness and nowhere.
Did you hear this? Sitting there for 2 hours on the table, resenting being a cube. Can you imagine that? And all of this is tied into this lifetime with the same thought patterns that existed way back there in eternity.
Yeah.
You know, how many billions of years ago when we're dealing with geometric forms as an outgrowth of our spirit. Now, continue on.
Yeah. So then I decided, all right, well, I can love being a cube. It's easier than loving the pain I was in a few days ago, a lot easier. So I loved being a cube and accepted the nothingness, and I decided it was all right because just went into that. And eventually I realised that I wanted feeling, and I wanted to experience love, and I wanted feelings, all types of feelings. But at the same time, I accepted being a cube in the now, and I accepted being nothing, nowhere, and without a body, etc. And then that brought me to the stage of being able to have a body again, or have a body. And I asked, why have I got a red and a white and a blue face on my cube, and the others here, there's my auntie and brothers, and they're all plain colours? And the answer was, because I'm destined to take a birth in America. Seemed really strange. Anyway, there I was, and I realised I was going to have a body soon. It was a very nice feeling, but I just went with that, and there...
A couple of billion years, away in the future.
And then it came to the stage where I knew I was going to have to leave the cube. And there was resistance to that. And there I was thinking, I've been stuck in this cube for so long, and now I'm resisting leaving it, because I don't know how to get out of it or what to do. And so I just went with that. And there I was. It was a gradual process of disentangling myself from that cube existence, and eventually I left it. And there I was, hovering inside this teepee, and I could see my mother and father there. And sometimes I got really close. I could see their faces. And my father is someone who I've been with in this lifetime at home, which was quite amazing. That took quite a long time, and I had to wait to be conceived into that body. So then I had to go through being disconnected. And in this lifetime, I've had a whole session on the table last year on being disconnected, feeling so disconnected in my life in different ways. And I related it back to that experience of being there, hovering in the teepee, waiting for a body, and being impatient and begging them, could they just get it together? And I need a body now, I can't wait any longer. And then I had to become patient and wait. And that went on for a period of time. And then eventually I was in the womb. And that felt really good. At least I knew I had a body now. And it was very safe. And by that time the points were long flat, and I was there on the table, and I didn't know quite what to do. I didn't want to be stuck. At least I got into the womb. I wasn't out without a body altogether. And I was disconnected.
We're not disconnected.
So then I got back into I want feelings again, and I realised, all right, this is a major word pattern. It's been in this body, it's been in the cube, and here it is again. I want feelings. I'm in the womb now, and I want feelings, because I can, when I was disconnected out there, I could see all these people, and I could see they had feelings and what they were experiencing, and I wanted that. I wanted what other people had. And so I thought, well, I know that when you're on the table and you're in another lifetime, you can't just leave the session there. You've got dangling. You've got to bring it back to this lifetime. So I thought I'd better look, and so I drew that together. And then I realised I was looking back at that Red Indian lifetime, and I could see it all there and all the beautiful people. And I realised that I really wanted to be there from that cube existence where there was love, but it was so limited in its expression. The white sphere loved me and did care for me and said, she would look after me, but that was the extent of it. And I really wanted to experience love. So there I was, about to take birth into this tribal situation. And I was looking at it all, and I thought, all these beautiful people there and all the love between them. And it's so intense. And that's what I wanted then, and I want it now. And at that moment, Esther fell off the table. And all these people came rushing to help her. I didn't realise she'd fallen off the table. There was this almighty crash. And I could feel the love of all these people coming to help her. And I realised, I've got it right here now. And it's all the same people. I just kept, no one person in particular. I just kept getting all of you, all of you, all of you, all of you, like that.
Thank you very much, Carol. Now, when you're stuck in a cube for a couple of hours on the table, don't let that bother you. It's just a passing imprisonment of one type or another, and resistance. Just enjoy. If you've been like I was as a small child, every single night for years, I had one nightmare, and that's being out in space, looking at a blue cube, and hating and resisting and fearing that blue cube. And then I'd move toward that blue cube and get stuck in the middle of it, and then the thing would smash me to smithereens to where I was nothing. And then it would flip out, clear out in space again, and then the whole thing would come over again. Every night my mother would come in and wash my face off with a cold towel, trying to bring me back to reality. And I got stuck in a word pattern, which it took me many years to straighten out. And where I realized, finally, that which I put my attention upon fearfully, I would draw that into my life. I hope some of you are listening. That which I put my attention on fearfully, I draw into my life. And when I didn't put my attention on it in my dreams anymore, I just didn't, I don't have to look at that blue cube. I'll look over here at this red sphere. And all of a sudden, my whole life just changed. Because I didn't have to fear something, because that which I put my attention upon, then that created in my existence. Now, this business that Carol has gone through, if you have some uneducated point holders holding on to her points while she's going through all this, you're going to question her sanity. You're going to question her sanity. Therefore, you have a responsibility, even though you may not have experienced it yourself, of realizing this type of thing does happen. Doug, would you like to share your experience, please, regarding this matter?
Well, I think I talked about it a few weeks back, but I had,
Stand up, please, so that they can see you.
I guess about 10 years ago, in the first visualization and consciousness course that I took, I was in a particular series of memories involving myself as a small child and my mother and father, and I kept getting this same basic memory of, which I think happened like many times over, but I kept getting this memory of waiting in the front hallway for my dad to come home from work, and kind of just sort of sitting there waiting, and then watching out through the little window to the side of the door and watching my dad walk up the steps, and then somehow, just because of where I was off to the side, my dad coming in, my mom coming out from the kitchen at the same time, and them giving each other a big hug, and me sort of being off on the side, not being noticed. And I went through that memory of, day after day after day in the course, and all of a sudden, this one day, I started to see a cube and a sphere and a tetrahedron. And it was basically the exact same scenario. It's just that we weren't people, but it was the same deal, where you had these three different shapes: the cube, the sphere, and the tetrahedron. And the emotions were the same, the words were the same, the event was, somewhat the same. I mean, we didn't have a house or anything, but it was a different kind of reality in some ways. I mean, it had different. There seemed to be different laws there in some areas, like physical laws. There didn't appear to be gravity, as far as I could figure, and there didn't appear. It appeared that the source of light was everywhere. It didn't appear to be coming from just any one direction. It just seemed like light just was everywhere. And, there didn't appear to be an up or a down or anything like that. So there's a lot of different things that were different, but the resistances were the same.
If you'll remember, the lights came from within the geometric form.
Right, the light came from us. I mean, it came from the spheres, the sphere, the cube, and the tetrahedron. Like, we were the source of light, rather than in the, there wasn't, as far as I could tell, like a sun anywhere or anything like that. There was just the light was all, coming from the out, coming from the inside out. I mean, all I can really say about the experience was it was every bit as vivid as any memory I've ever had of being in the human body, and the resistance patterns were totally identical, exactly identical to everything I was going through in this life.
That's that simple. Now, do any of you have any questions on this? Any questions? Yes. Tom, come up here, please.
I like the gear concept and how that was working on the skull, and that's what my question is about. When we have that done and it shifts and releases all this stuff, I'm interested in what you were saying about genetics, because my mom goes through migraines or used to at times. My dad's been through combat and the war and everything. I've always been very protective about them. I don't believe it the other way around. I believe you take care of your parents too. Is there any chance that when I go through something through this, it's going to help them out? Maybe their head will go through a shift, maybe their hearing will improve, things like that?
We will have case in point when you ask that question. I'm reminded about, here comes Anita now. Anita, would you come in here, please? And I'm going to have you answer Tom's question. I would like, well, thank you. Perpetuating my,
addiction.
This morning I gave up coffee, and then Rex comes over and says, John, would you like to have a cup? And I sat there and thought for a moment, and I said, yes. And now Anita brings me another. I'm grateful to her, I mean, it's all right if we perpetuate, because I asked her for this one.
I'm glad you clarified that. What was the question?
We start again?
Remember the lady with the job?
Okay.
The question again. Give that to Anita.
I was talking about the gear portion of the skull, and when it gets moved again and releases all of the trauma, and he was talking about genetics, and I was wondering now, can maybe my parents hear better, clear up their head, because I know both of them have had traumas of various sorts like that, and I would like to do something. If I'm going through this, I'd like to go through something that's going to benefit my parents, and if it's going to relieve my dead grandmother, who was a real pain to live with and stuff like that, and get rid of some of that stuff, I would like to do that, because both my grandmothers caused my mom and my dad problems, and they were hard-headed, and I'm just wondering if this is going to be some type of a genetic release, and my parents may benefit from it.
Okay. Well, we went, this is an example of how that can help your relatives. This is where we were in Motueka. We had a natural healing center there, New Zealand, and we had a girl come in one day, and she had a jaw that was sticking way out. I mean, she really looked like a monster. I mean, it was really grotesque, like really far out from the face like that. And I could hardly look at her when she came to the counter, and she approached me, and she said to me, "Can you help me?" And of course I said yes, because I always say yes.
I'm a doctor.
Right. So anyway, she went on the full program, and she was on a really good diet to start with, so we didn't have much trouble there converting her over or anything. And she was eating really good food. She did the supplements. She went through all the points, and then she got into cranial work. And because of the severity of the situation, John took on himself to do the cranial. So he was in the third session of the cranial. And at first, there was a lot of screaming in the room, a lot of screaming. She was yelling and screaming, and she was reliving birth trauma that she had because she had instrument delivery. And she came out of the room at one point because she was screaming so much, and she ran into the bathroom, and she was crying in there, and finally I went to see, what was happening, and I said, yeah, she was never going to come back to the table because it was so painful. And
This is a cranial?
this is during the cranial, yeah.
Sorry, Mom and Dad, you're on your own.
And finally, I convinced her to go back on the table, and she did. She went back on the table, and John continued the cranial. And then all of a sudden, the top of her skull starts going like that, and the jaw just regenerated into a natural jaw.
Do you remember the waves and waves of motion that the skull went through? Just like waves of the sea. Her head was just like waves of the sea, like it was totally mobile.
Yeah, the skull was like just totally like it was jello or something, was cracking all over the place and moving. And she got off the table, and the jaw was perfectly normal. But the part that you want to know is that at the same time while this is going on, her mother was picking berries in the berry patch because they had a business and they had to get the berries out. And she had such a tremendous headache at the time of the cranial that she passed out in the berry patch. And
my mom picks berries, too.
Oh, no.
I get to see her scratches all over her arms when I come home. Strangest thing happened to me.
Yeah.
Now, the mother had migraine headaches for years. And when her daughter went, now she gave birth to the daughter, instrument delivery. The mother had a very hard time. When the daughter went through the re-experience of her birth trauma, listen, that lady would look beautiful when she came out of there. You would not know it was the same person. She went through tremendous structural change of the head. Now, she was a netball star in the valley around Nelson and the big league they had down around through there. And here you have this monster, if I can use that expression. That's what she looked like. And here you have this monster out playing netball, and she was a high scorer on the team. And suddenly the name is the same, but you have this beautiful lady out there, a couple of inches taller, after her cranial, playing netball. And here, with same name, but you would never recognize her on the gym floor or on the netball floor. It was just absolutely marvelous.
Well, I hope this can work because I think a lot of us here are here for more than just one reason or something like that. And I'd like to give something back to my parents for everything they've done. And if I can relieve some of the trauma like that, because when my mom had headaches, my grandma always said, "It's those damn kids that gave them to you." And she didn't get any sympathy there or any empathy. So it was just really neat to read about or have you explain that thing and make it so I can understand it. And I hope it works.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
When you were talking about the sutures, that little one back there, is it possible to move that with your muscles? Because I was playing around with it there and I was tensing up there, and I thought I felt it move, but I wasn't certain. But I got one hell of a headache. So just like a comment on that, please.
No comment. But it will move sometimes, Duncan. But it doesn't move that easy. It starts to move and gets you in the middle of a healing crisis, and might be several days before we get you out of that.
Well, I know I'm a bit loose on top. I mean, look, it can move around all over the place.
We'll have to see what happens there. Okay. I appreciate your questions because these are valid. Now, when you go through cranial work, you're going through a restructuring as you release the pain that you have inherited down through the centuries, down through the thousands and thousands of years genetically. So we'll look at that. Now, back to the form. Now, those of you who have had tailbones done and completed, We have a lot of bookwork here to keep track of everybody, so please be patient with us on that. Right in this area, by putting pressure then on this mastoid process, it has to be done an exact specific way or you're not going to get any results. And what we do is put our thumb kind of like along this area right here, put the thumb right here on the mastoid process, even with it right here, and the rest of our thumb kind of up along the edge here, and press toward the eyeball, and that torques the whole doggone temporal bone. Now, it's not going to change the beveling, but it's going to straighten out any of the sutures that are going to be quite out of position, shall we say, because normally if the beveling is level, then you're going to have the things just close together like this and you're not going to feel anything. But there are several of you with some real, where you're off quite considerably on the structures, and you can go right along here and feel this huge ridge along your squamosal suture, okay? Now, I want you to go back and get all those landmarks so that you know where they are on that 3 pages of sheet that you have there on your checklist. Now, once the temporal bone is taken care of and we have unlocked that one, you'll find that the sphenoidal bone here, right through this area here, will be beveled also in this direction along here, so that basically the sphenoidal bone overlays the parietal and also overlays the frontal bone. Now, we've worked out where we know what to do with the sphenoidal bone, and that'll be what we call the triple axis cranial. And we'll be getting into that part because that's what's going to move this particular bone and get that thing freed up, and it's very, very painful. We'll probably get into that tomorrow because we have to get this one done today on those of you who are leaving. And so we've got your sphenoidal, and then we have our parietal bone, and usually that will correct, and now we have several people with huge openings along your coronal suture along in here, which is between the parietal and the frontal bone, and usually this one will clear up when the sphenoidal bone is taken care of. The whole head structure moves. It's just a huge movement when we get into that part of it. But I wanted to go over this part. Doug, I'd like you to fill in any gaps that you might want to express here.
Well,
just a moment, please. Karen?
Do you do both sides of the mastoid at the same time?
We'll go into detail on that with each person individually. You start out on the left side, which is the yin side, and we go from the left side to the right side. So you do the temporal bone on both sides. Okay, Doug.
You've got a couple of photocopies in there that show a baby's skull. And you'll notice if you look at a baby's skull that there will be 6 different soft spots on a baby's skull. You'll have the soft spot right up here, which will be where the frontal and the 2 parietal bones will eventually come together, which in an adult is called what?
Bregma.
Okay, the bregma. In an infant, that's going to be what's called your anterior fontanelle. That'll be this area right up in here. You've got a second soft spot back about here, which will be what in an adult? Lambda, which will be where your 2 parietal bones and your occiput come together. You've also got...
that's the posterior fontanelle.
The posterior fontanelle in an infant. You've also got 2 other soft spots on a baby's skull on each side, making a total then of 6. This area right here on a baby is going to be called your mastoid fontanelle, and this is where you've got your parietal bone, your occiput, and the temporal bone, the mastoid portion of the temporal bone coming together right in this area. And this is known as the asterion in an adult, right in this point right here where these 3 bones come together.
You'll have that on your checklist.
That's the asterion, but it's what was the mastoid fontanelle in an infant. And you've got your parietal, occipital, and the mastoid portion of the temporal bone. the other soft spot that we're looking at here is a larger one, which would be approximately in this area, and on an infant it would be known as the sphenoid fontanelle, right in this area. And what distinguishes this area from the other soft spots is that in the other soft spots, or the other points, you're dealing with three different bone structures coming together. You've got your two parietal bones and your frontal bone up here. You've got your two parietal bones and your occiput back there. You've got your occiput, parietal, and temporal coming together right here. But in this area, which would be the sphenoid fontanelle in an infant, or the pterion in an adult, you've got four different bone structures coming together, which John's been referring to. You've got your frontal, parietal, sphenoidal, and temporal bones that are coming together in this basic area here. So this is really in a lot of ways the key to unlocking the skull, because it's this place where you've got four major bone structures all coming together at once. Now, what you'll find here, as John has expressed, is these bones they're not just meeting flush against each other like this. There's an overlapping or a beveling that takes place. And the easy way to remember this is if you go with respect to these four bone structures here, if you go from the inside out, it's going to be in alphabetical order, meaning the frontal bone is going to be at the bottom of the heap. Next will be the parietal bone, which will overlap the frontal. Next will be the sphenoid, which will overlap both the parietal and the frontal. And then the temporal bone that's going to overlap all of them. So it's just, with those four bones, it's just going to be alphabetical from the inside out. And this is why in the cranial work, you got to start on the top of the heap. This is the first bone structure that you have to unlock, the temporal bone, because it's the one that's basically holding down the other ones beneath it. Up until about maybe 9 years ago, eight or 9 years ago, we didn't used to do the mastoid in the cranials. We used to just go right to the triple axis after tailbones, which is the part which we'll get to later in the week where you're working on the sphenoid. And that's there's probably a few people here that have had cranials that way. But starting back around 86 or 87, John started adding in working on the mastoid first and unlocking the temporal bone. And one of the things that was immediately obvious was it really cut the time way, way down in the triple axis. It made it much, much, much easier to get the triple axis portion of the cranial, because the sphenoid was already free to move to some degree by unlocking the temporal there. Now, a couple other things to tie in here. You have something we'll be talking about a lot in the 5th and 6th weeks will be reflexes from different muscles to different organs and glands, where every muscle in the body is going to have reflex activity to certain organs and glands. And one of the things to realize here is that when you're dealing with this particular area right in here, you're dealing with an absolutely incredible amount of muscle reflex activity there. Your temporal bone will have usually about 15 muscle attachments on each side. 15 muscle attachments on your left temporal, and 15 more on your right temporal, which is quite an incredible amount of muscle attachments. Your sphenoid, you only have one sphenoid. It's the same sphenoid that goes, from this side all the way through. Looks basically like a bird with its wings open. But on the sphenoid, you usually have around 11 muscle attachments on each side, making a total of 22. Sometimes you got a few extra there, I believe up to about 26. Is that correct?
Varies.
But usually you've got about 11 muscle attachments on each side of the sphenoid, meaning that you'll have 22 in entirety. And that means that the sphenoid, as far as I know, has more muscle attachments than any other bone in the entire body. And then next after that is going to be your temporal bone. So when you're working in this area, the repercussions are enormous throughout the entire body, because you're reflexing everything imaginable there.
Doug, would you take that Pterion?
Yeah.
Okay, spell that.
Pterion.
It's on your checklist. Now, the Pterion here has one unique quality. On this particular skull, the line between the sphenoid bone and the parietal is quite lengthy. Okay, see how long that is? But you'll find that in many, many people, for whatever reason, that line will become literally a point. And there's no line there whatsoever, but it's just simply a point where the four bones, as Doug has suggested, they all come together at one point. But so that point can be that entire line, called the Pterion, or it can be just the one point where there's no line there.
That was it?
Okay, we'll get into the muscles of mastication a little later. But that information that Doug gave is right on. Any questions here now? Tarek? Okay, Sama.
I'm just wondering whether there will ever come a time when it's appropriate to do cranials on babies.
The baby should have their cranials done after their STO. You look at the eyeball and find out what areas there may be some weaknesses. You make sure that the pineal, pituitary, thyroid, medulla are done. And just the basic little thing, the pancreas is very important. And then you do the cranial work, especially if they've had any hard delivery. And then the bone structures, if you've noticed many times, many of the children that are born, they're born with a malformed head, even with a normal delivery. Now, I've delivered a number of children myself, and there's a number of, sometimes it takes a long time for the head structure to form properly as it's coming out of the birth canal. And then the sutures, so to speak, are overlapped considerably, where you might have a very pointed head, for example. Now, normally that comes right. But with a little properly applied cranial work, you can take the little baby's head and mold that to proper position just shortly after birth, but you do it very gently, Sama. Very gently, and just hold your thumb there, and as you get the electricity and get the pain out of the little baby's points, the little head will just move back together. You don't have to deal with just a baby's head that is malformed either. Anita, remember Jeremiah?
Oh, yeah, we had a boy about 7 years old? About 7 years old. And in the Cook Islands, he had coconut fell on his head. It's very common there for this to happen, but because they stand under the trees. So the coconut fell on his head, and in his head, he had like a bowl structure when he came to us. And yeah, you could take a soup bowl and just sit it right in there, and it would just stay there. That's how big it was. And yeah, and then John did cranial work on it. He had the family, I think, do the cranial on it, and that popped right back up. Popped right back up.
Now, he had, as a result of the cranial injury, he had brittle bone disease. He broke every bone in his body just by simply falling down. He couldn't dance anymore, and you take dancing away from a young boy in the Cook Islands, you've taken away his life. He couldn't perform at all in any function. He couldn't take part in any athletics. He couldn't do any work in school. And after the cranial work was completed and the head was perfectly normal again, he was able. I saw him on TV, and he was doing dancing again at the various ceremonies. And as a little fellow, he's very agile, and his brain is normal. He's at the top of his class. And so this cranial work will help immensely to correct these conditions, so the child does not have to go through life with disorders such as cerebral palsy or other problems due to instrument delivery. Get the cranial done early and everything is corrected, nerve supply and circulation is restored, and you have full normal activity. Now there's 3 questions that are out there that I have to answer. Number 1, what if a person is born a vegetable? And there's no response anywhere. My answer to that is I don't know. I don't know if they will respond. We've had cases where they have. We've had cases where they haven't. And here's wherein you have to start at the beginning with the STO point and start with the endocrine glands, and perhaps there's something missing anatomically, internally, that would not allow the body to function correctly. We don't know. But we do know this, and I want you to be aware of this and put this down in your notes, that you take many people who are, shall we say, have a body that is not functioning properly, and you hold points on them, and they come up scale to where they no longer want to hang on to that particular body, and they're willing to let it go, and they die. Did you all hear me? Now this is where you're dealing with some degenerative conditions. This is very important, because when a person passes on in a situation like that, they'll say, well, body electronics did it to that child or did it to that person with a problem. But all you have done is restored their free agency and their ability to exert their will and determination, and they decide that they no longer want that body and they want to dump it. And they want the chance of going on and getting another little body which is not defective. So please keep that in mind. It's that simple. The second thing, what do you do with cerebral palsy? And I believe Doug has covered that along with multiple sclerosis and things like this, where you deal with the STO point. Just go right down the flow sheet in body electronics, and then down there you'll find, along your flow sheets, you'll find your, what they call the anterior cervicals. And you work the anterior cervicals on people who have cerebral palsy, and the spasms disappear one by one after maybe a series of point holdings, each taking from 5 to 8 hours. And then gradually you have them up and walking. After cranial work is very important, and you actually have them up and walking and moving where they might have been in a wheelchair for 35, 40 years. Now this will take a little time, but you know, it's worth it, especially when they're talking again as normally as I'm talking to you after never being able to communicate for years. But the cerebral palsy corrects itself after we give the ability of the body to correct itself by removing the blockages which keep it from functioning properly. Question? I didn't say that again? Oh, tape, okay. Hang on. You're all right. Okay, Wolf, question.
Just a technical question. I mean, how do you keep children, especially when they're very young, still for such a long time? I mean, they might just start screaming and get up. You can't force them to lie down. What is your experience with this, please?
And Wolf wouldn't want that to happen at all. Well, we have held them down gently. We have put people on each arm and each leg, and we just gently hold them down. But they do cry a lot. And a lot of times the mother gets very upset and everything, but you just have to keep holding them there. And then eventually, they just stop crying. And they just lay there.
In your notes, put down the following information. A little child who is totally reactive and out of control is not capable of exercising his free agency. Now you have permissive mothers that don't want to discipline their children because they feel that they're taking away the free agency of the child. And the child is given free rein to be totally enmeshed in his reactive mechanisms So by the time they're a teenager, they're totally out of control and unmanageable. And sociopath, because they do not recognize discipline or law in any manner, shape, or form. What we do is we recognize that a small child who is unmanageable and ungovernable, you get them on the table with the full knowledge and prior consent and education of the parents on these matters, because they're dealing with their own DNA. It's a very important thing for the parents. You just don't go and put them on the table. You educate them fully first so that they understand that you control the small child on the table until they can learn to control themselves. And so let's say you start out with a small child as on the STO point. Okay? You start out with that child on the STO point. You'll have one friendly, knowledgeable adult, knowledgeable concerning body electronics, very lovingly and very gently restraining the action of the right leg. And you have them holding the leg with one hand on the knees so the leg will not bend, and the other hand simply holding the leg down. You have another adult holding the left leg in like manner. You have another one holding the arm. And you have another one holding the arm, left arm, right arm. And then you have another person holding very gently the head on the forehead and the other hand on the chest, so they can't arch up and throw off the points that are being held by other adults, depending upon how many you have. And so you're just simply holding the STO point. First of all, they go completely numb, because they go back through birth trauma, perhaps. They go back through different injuries that they may have had. We don't know. But they go completely numb, just like we do when we're on the table. After the numbness passes, then come in, Kath. After the numbness passes, then what happens is you have the apathy, where they can't do anything. And they're just simply kind of whimpering away there. Then they come up to grief, where they just unload their grief. And you can see them going through that particular episode, and they just cry and cry and cry as a victim would cry, because they are trying every which way to make you feel guilty for holding their body down. Here is where you make sure that any constraint that you give them is non-painful to the person. Now, they will play the game all the way to the hilt of making it appear like you're hurting them. But you're not hurting them. You are gently and lovingly constraining them so they're not going to be flipping and flopping all the way around the place and running out in the yard and getting hit by a car that's across the street, trying to get out of the point-holding session. You follow me? Because you want to start the STO, you want that STO to be finished. They are reactive. You're not taking away their free agency by holding them on the table. You're simply disciplining them as a kind and loving parent. Is this clear? Okay. Then they come up to anger or fear, and they want to get out of there in the worst way. And they get up to sheer terror, and they go through the terror of being simply restrained or held down. This is a reactive mechanism that's genetically imbued within them. They go through the terror. Then they come up to the anger. And when they come up to the anger, you know that they're angry. They're terribly indignant that you would do this to them, and they're no longer a victim at all. They'll slash out, strike out any way they can to destroy anybody who's constraining them at all, no matter how small they are. And you'll have a little violent little fellow there, so you make sure that you've called out the big guns that can understand this ahead of time and will hold them down during that time, because many of them will have superhuman strength when they're angry. Then you come from anger on up to where they start burning in their body. and they're hot, and they're radiating, just like you have your hand on a hot stove. If there has been brain damage, for example, where there has been oxygen deprivation to the brain during birth trauma, during that time, that head will be one of the hottest little heads you have ever felt. You put your hand on that little head, and that doggone head will absolutely be burning off. And then you know that you're on the road, and you've got the job well in hand. They have to be nutrient prepared for this to happen. I should have mentioned that initially. Then finally, when they come out of it, they don't have to be constrained at all. They're very happy to lay there just by the facilitators just saying, lay still, or you control your body on your own so we don't have to control you. And then the control issue comes up for many, many people because they can't control themselves, therefore they can't control their children. And so, but the control issue here is something we all have to overcome. Now, this is very, very important. After it's over and done with, that little child's back to normal, and if you've had an IQ test administered properly, Form A and Form B, you'll find that our IQ has come from 80 or 90 up to 120 to 130 just in one session by getting the oxygen to the brain, because we have had people that go back to the schools where they come from, and the teachers are totally amazed because they're not the same child. The blockages to learning is gone, oftentimes. Sometimes you have to work with them 2 or 3 times. Sometimes you're dealing with entity involvement, and that might be a little more difficult. And if you have listened carefully to my tapes on the healing crisis, I think I have a story in there that will set you thinking a little bit. So I think that's important. Okay. This is a terror to Tom Stacer, this little lady here. All she has to do is put her elbow in his back, and he just says, oh, oh, oh. So take a look at this little gal here, and if you there's a rumor afoot that I've heard several people say that Tom is just nothing but a great big softie.
Is that right? John, everything that we were just talking about then, how does that apply to working on a little baby that's, say, under 10 weeks old, and that is probably going to scream and yell through the whole thing anyway, and so you really don't get a good indication of the pain barrier that the baby's going through, and also in terms of getting, the nutritional supplements into it, the minerals and enzymes if it's just still breastfeeding?
Just take it and rub the stuff on the skin. It absorbs directly into the body. The various nutrients like the enzymes, and the enzymes will be there. Just put it a little bit in the mouth and they take it right down. Tastes good to them. Minerals, just rub it into the skin. Make a liquid out of it and just rub it on there. It just absorbs immediately into the body. Okay? And you have everything you need, because a baby usually is very healthy, having been born from a mother who's been nutritionally prepared.
If you're holding points on the baby, and obviously the baby can't tell you when it's numb or it's in apathy, or then it would be very important to finish the points properly, wouldn't it? Because you'd have no indication of,
And you always finish the point. In different parts of the United States, we've trained a lot of midwives, where the midwives, after birth, have always administered the STO point, and this gets a baby off right. Now, if there has been a cesarean delivery, then the child has never gone through the birth canal, and since the child has gone through the birth canal, the baby has never been born. And as a result of that, oftentimes the child has certain inadequacies later on in life because they have no feeling to the extremities of their body, because there hasn't been the push through the vaginal canal at the time of birth, which compresses the skull to force the cerebrospinal fluid out through the ventral roots, out to every cell of the body, to get it energized with that first breath of air. And when that first breath of air hits the child, then the prana, which is energized by the astrological influences, leaves its imprint upon every single cell of that child's body, and thus you have the beginning of your astrological chart. And this yes? What part of it would you want? Bottom line, when the child is coming through the birth canal, the purpose of a vaginal delivery, okay, is for the purpose of putting compression upon the skull properly, so that as that compression that goes on the skull, this forces the cerebral spinal fluid down the spine, out through the ventral roots, out through the perivascular canals, out through the perineural canals, out through all of the hollow collagen fibrils which interconnect all the cells of the body, putting the cerebral spinal fluid into every cell of the body, making it possible for interneural connections. Because you have to have all of the electrolytes and all of the metabolites in the cells so that the nerves can be interconnected at that point of time. You got that? Did I go too fast? Okay, if slow me down if you don't get it. That's your responsibility now. Which didn't you get, Pam? After this goes through the collagen fibers, it gets out to every cell of the body. Now you have to have the metabolites and the electrolytes in the cerebral spinal fluid, which make it possible for the interneural connections to take place, for the firing to take place to the nerves. If the minerals aren't there, the nerves don't fire properly. You've got to have it there. And this is the importance of the cerebral spinal fluid on the nervous system. The cerebral spinal fluid feeds the nervous system. Any questions on that? Yes, sir. Are you all right on that now? Okay.
My second child having been a cesarean birth, what type of change in behavior will you be able to observe to realize that he has something which is inadequate? Because I can't find anything I would say that makes me feel that she's not really in harmony with as the other children.
If you can't find anything, Sama, there's nothing I can say from this point.
Because I was just wondering now whether when I go, I should make arrangements like to have a STO held or things like that.
Yes. Oh, yes. Regardless, because whatever you do, you give her the greater the advantage. After the STO point is done, you do a little pinch test, and you probably find, well, it might be deficient. But check the eyeballs out and see where the closed lesions are. And just work with the child. And all of a sudden, by holding a few points, you'll find that there'll be a lot of changes take place with the wee one. Okay?
With a cesarean birth, is there something that we need to do as soon as the baby gets here, the compression of the head, or what process to kind of make up for that?
That's what the STO point will be for. And that'll bring the nerve supply down where it was deficient. But usually in all cesarean births, they're born with very blue fingers and hands, because the circulation's not down there, the nerve supply is not down there, and their extremities are cold. That's not in every case, but the STO will be valuable for all types of children.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to be present shortly after the birth of my friend's twins, who were born breech birth. Both of them were breech, and they were about 6 weeks premature, so they were quite small. So they probably, because they were born breech, they probably didn't get quite the same compression in the skull, although they did go through the birth canal. But anyway, one of the twins was quite listless and just not very active, and my friend said she felt very concerned about her. And I asked her if it was okay if I held her STOs, and she said, sure, go ahead. And so I just held the STOs about half an hour they heated, got real hot and throbbed, and as soon as I was done, the baby got real pink and started to just look more alive and vibrant. It was such a blessing to be able to do something so simple.
Thank you, Maggie. Glenn.
I'd like to know if anything could be done for a Down syndrome baby.
We have worked with Down syndrome children. Now, have you listened to the tapes on the healing crisis? The little audio tape?
I'm not sure if I have it on the healing crisis, yes.
On the audio tape?
Yes.
Okay. You remember the part I talked about of the little Down syndrome child, 13 years of age, that couldn't put 3 words together? That was entity involved?
I must have missed that.
You missed that. You better go back and listen to that. Okay, because in this situation here, what tape do you have? Who has it on your tapes? Okay, where did you get your tape? From the Hideaway. Okay, I think, does Graham Clare, how many got Graham Clare's tapes? Now, I put it on that one. Okay, somebody might have cut them out of on the others. We have a lot of people tampering with tapes because they don't believe in some of the information, so they cut it out because to them it's very disturbing. I want that on the tapes. Now, if you don't have that tape with that Down syndrome information, you get that directly from Graham Clare in New Zealand because I personally made sure that that tape was correct. Now, I've had other people tampering with my tapes that take a lot of stuff out of there that they do not accept or believe, and yet they believe in body electronics as long as it matches up with their religious beliefs. Okay, and I'm sorry if that's on. Yes, sir? It's on there. Good. Okay, but if you don't have it, get one directly because we had a master made that's good master, and you get good quality tapes on the healing crisis from Graham Clare. Get that. Pardon me? I don't know if you want to hear it. All right, let's look at reality here. This is shortly, in fact, this was my last patient before I got drug off to jail. And I was very happy about this because I was given a chance to work with this little girl who is a 13-year-old Down syndrome child. And this little girl, 13 years of age, could not put more than 3 words together. She had cuts and burns all over her body because she couldn't feel temperature. She was unable to feel anything, and she had this big, thick tongue, the almond eyes, and you know how Down syndrome are all klutzy when they walk, when they're very extreme Down syndrome. Well, the mother never gave up on her and had hired a speech therapist to work with her in Chicago and paid her well to come and just work with her daughter and try to get her to do something to improve her speech. Well, 3 words in no more than 3 words at a time. She had the girl taking guitar lessons, and she couldn't even hold the guitar right, much less strum a string in rhythm. And so that was just as far as many people thought was a lost cause. She had her taking ballet lessons, which is like an elephant in a china shop. And a lot of people wouldn't accept any of that was going on. Now, the mother didn't lose hope. Finally, they found out that I was in Chicago, and this is about 1980. 81, somewhere in there, 80. And they brought the little girl to me, and I put her on a program. And then one day we rented this one motel room that we felt was quite soundproof. And a lot of people got wind that were going to be there. And by that time, Chicago was abuzz with body electronics. We had maybe 5,000 people involved. lots of medical people, lots of nurses and whatnot that we've helped. Now, at that time, the threats were starting to come from the AMA and the College of Surgeons, where the center of their activity is Chicago. Now, I don't mind, putting my head into the lion's mouth, but my golly, folks, don't pull the tail. This is what I did, and I walked in, full of confidence, and I got whipped very severely, and 2-week-long court trial and all this sort of thing, and then finally, the judge gave me 1-year probation, told me to get out of the state for my protection, and and everyone was totally wonderful to me except the AMA and the College of Surgeons. They wanted to get me behind bars in the worst way, and they did everything they could. Because I had taken a newspaper reporter, told her that she needed a cranial because her head was terribly malformed, and she came disguised with a man from the Department of Registration, medical, and did everything they could to get me. So they did. What did the 10 charges that were started was to have a massage table in the room. Okay? Second charge was to have records that I was keeping of my patients. The third charge to have a loop to see the eye. The fourth charge was to have a torch to look at the eye. The fifth charge was to have an iridology chart there to look as a diagnostic tool. And it went right on down with all the little paraphernalia and paperwork that I had to wherein the all of this was there in the room when I was working with this little Down syndrome child. But it all happened after we were done. And so I had all these charges against me for practicing medicine without a license. In the court trial, according to the law in Illinois, the state of Illinois, was that if a mother were to put a Band-Aid on her child's knee, she's practicing medicine without a license because she's diagnosing and prescribing. If somebody has a cold and you tell them to have a glass of orange juice that has vitamin C in it and would help their cold, you're diagnosing and prescribing, and you're in violation of the State Medical Practice Act. We went on, and if a coach, for example, were to take his sprained ankle of one of his basketball players and put that sprained ankle into cold water to reduce the swelling, then he's diagnosing and prescribing and is in violation of the State Medical Practice Act. All that came out for the court trial. So if I'm looking in the eyeball of a person and I tell him to take an herb for that particular problem that a person might have, then I'm diagnosing and prescribing, and I'm in violation of the State Medical Practice Act. And over 2 weeks, no matter how, the galleries were full of people who are friends, fully supporting, doctors, chiropractors, naturopaths. They're all supporting me every which way, but because of the law, everything was thrown out because I was in violation of the State Medical Practice Act and was guilty for a misdemeanor in the state of Illinois for practicing medicine without a license. Okay, at the very end of the trial, I came out with a 45-minute speech denouncing the whole system for the way it was set up, denouncing the medical profession and the way that they have conducted themselves, denouncing the College of Surgeons because I had all of their paperwork to perpetuate cancer and so on. All this was made known, and they had a tiger by the tail. They didn't know quite what to do with me. They wanted to quiet me down any way they could, because the secretary for the College of Surgeons was one of my patients. She gave me all of the paperwork showing that the minimum cost at that time for a cancer patient was $80,000, and that was big money. And the whole purpose of that College of Surgeons was to get the names of the people and make sure that they follow through with every form of medicine possible, so that the big hospitals make money, so that the doctors make money, so that the pharmaceutical firms make money. It's all big money. And when you're aware that the heads of all these different organizations just simply migrate from one position to another, to the pharmaceutical firms and the College of Surgeons and the AMA and so on, They're all in cahoots with one another. It's nothing but a big business situation in the United States. Well, I made myself very unpopular then, as I make myself unpopular now by telling people the truth. And things haven't changed much over there, except that the pharmaceutical firms and the AMA and so on have become more vicious, because now they're tied into the FDA with people in the FDA who have had big positions with pharmaceutical firms and medical associations and so on. You with me on this? The whole thing is a downright farce, folks. It's about time people know it. Now, let's go back to Down syndrome, which is far more important and far more interesting because we're dealing with the little human soul. I plugged in to this little child on the STO point, not knowing what to expect. And I had maybe 30 people in the room, but I had 6 adults there to help to hold the little child down in the way that I described to you. Within just a few minutes, the little girl with this klutzy little body and this Down syndrome tongue and eyes and whatnot started cursing me with long sentences in a man's voice. And I knew that we had one, a live one. And then finally, this voice threatened me with my life, threatened all my relatives, threatened all my children, threatened. And knowing information and telling it all openly there about me, about my history, about my past, about my parents, about everything. And I just sat there and said in wonderment about the tremendous intelligence network that goes on in the astral realm. And this went on. I wish I had that on tape. But then for 4 hours, 4 solid hours, every so often, the moment I was a little tiny bit off guard on holding the STO point, the little body would arch up in a great big arch, the head would reach back, and all this green, slimy stench would be vomited up and thrown right in my face. It would have gotten in my face if my mouth weren't open. Which happened one time. And but the mother was there just wiping it all off of me, and the stench was just unbelievable coming out of that little girl. And the little girl started having feeling down through the body. Finally, one arm goes up like this, and one adult goes across the room, slammed into the wall. Another arm comes up like this, and the other adult goes across the room, slams in the wall. One foot goes off this way, one foot goes off this way, and people go flying. And then, here's where you struggle to maintain the STO point. And I was not going to give up, and I was not going to give in, and I continued to have everyone come back over and just smother the little girl. She was just a dainty little girl. And here she was with a superhuman strength, and this was going on. The room turned ice cold. People had to put their coats on. You've seen what they call the Exorcist, the show. This was not unlike that. But the room was just ice cold. And the voices coming out of this little girl were unbelievable. Finally, the voices withered away. I didn't fully understand at that time the exorcism by commanding these little spirits to part, but these things left. And the scars healed up on the little body. The little fingers that were all klutzy straightened out to long, tapered fingers, 13-year-old girl's fingers. I looked at the facial structures changing. I looked at the girl laying there with no constraint, and I just told her, "You lay still now." She did. "Now you breathe deep and regular," and she did, and finally the points were complete. Only the STO point was held. Florence, 76 years of age. I've been trying to remember her name for about 10 years. Florence, bless her heart, she took the little girl by the hand and walked her way down the hall and back up again to the room. The little girl came over and threw her arms around me and she said, "Thank you, oh, so much." Okay, that was kind of exciting because the little girl was talking normally in a different voice. She didn't look like a Down syndrome child. After that was over and done with, we did have blood tests downstream, and that one chromosome that was abnormal that you find in Down syndrome was not there, so there was a blood change. The little girl was taken, first of all, to her speech therapist. And the little girl talked the ear off that speech therapist in long sentences explaining everything in detail, what had happened and everything. The speech therapist went right through all the material that she had gone through before, and the little girl just, no problem at all, no problem with advanced stuff. The little girl, the teacher just shook her head. She said every single block to learning was completely gone. I hope you're hearing me. She took her little daughter then to the guitar teacher. And the guitar teacher got blown away because here's this beautiful little girl coming in instead of this klutzy Down syndrome. And the little girl sat down, played the guitar, every chord right on, all the tunes right on, all the rhythm right on. And she evidently remembered all the things that had happened during the teaching, but was unable to get it out. And that I don't know about the ballet, but I'm sure there was a world of difference in ballet, but I never got that report back. But these are things that can happen, and the child eventually was, as I understand, was at the top of her class in regular schooling just a year or two later, as she went up through, the acquisition of knowledge that she had missed as a younger girl. Now, so Down syndrome. We've had a number of Down syndrome children that have become normal. A lot of them were improved, but not fully normal yet. But we've had head structure change, cranial change, tremendous bodily change, and with that, psychological change. Now, whose question on Down syndrome was this? Okay. David, that was yours, Glenn? You got it. Now, some things take a little longer than others. But we've had good results over a period of time with all Down syndrome children. Some take a little longer than others. I think you're first, Jeff.
Yeah. I was just wondering about babies with holes in their heart. Would you push their STO then they're straight onto their heart points, or? Just onto the heart points, STO and heart points, and just go through there, and there's a lot of things happen. Now, I've had a heart murmur since I was born. My heart murmur's completely closed up where they said I had a hole between my, between my ventricles. Well, there's no hole there. And it doesn't matter, a baby, you can do the same thing with an adult. David.
Did the room become cold very much towards the end of the session, or?
It depends.
Well, in this particular case, so how is it?
There was probably about 4 hours of ice cold.
So it got cold fairly quickly?
Oh, yes, terribly cold.
I see.
And all of this was tied in with entity involvement.
Yeah. And although you didn't use a decree because you weren't sort of at that space at time, I would imagine, I don't want to invade your private thoughts, but I would imagine your concern for God was very much in your mind.
Yes, but my concern was God from which point of view? Christian point of view?
Well,
the Buddhist point of view?
I wasn't trying to get into religions. I meant your concern for involving God in what was happening, whatever you want to call God.
Prayer, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
No question. But not prayer from, one particular religious concept. I always thought of it as Father upstairs. And that's how I would talk as a personal relationship with Father upstairs. And this is how I talk today. I always talk like there's a